Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are new and returning community members, we're so happy to see you. Whoops, have I lost you?
Nope, we can hear you.
I can't see anyone all of a sudden. There we go. Oh, it was just slides. Okay. If everyone could please keep your mics muted, unless I have questions and you need to answer them for me. Please keep your mics muted till the end when we'll have our open conversation and we'll welcome everyone's engagement. If anyone has questions or comments throughout the presentation, please go ahead and use the chat function, and we'll go back through the chat at the end to address your comments and questions. We are recording this conversation and streaming it live on Facebook, so it will be available for later viewing. If you don't want to be recorded, we invite you to turn your camera off with no hard feelings. So for anyone new joining this evening, Sarasota Strong is a growing group of Sarasota County neighbors committed to learning about trauma and responding to its impact. Though with the pandemic and everything moving to virtual platforms, we have started to actually reach a national and even international following of supporters. Our mission is to promote community-wide trauma awareness through healing, education, action, and leadership. And our vision is to create a community that cares for itself. So what can you do? Well, be a part of our conversation and join our community forums like this one to become a part of a trauma-informed, resilient Sarasota. Join a working group or register for a workshop or training found on our website at srqstrong.org. Let me do that again. www.srqstrong.org or email sarasotastrong@gmail.com. Our topics are driven by you, so email us what you'd like to have a conversation about. Tonight, we're going to be talking about loss, losing a loved one during COVID-19. Losing a loved one at any time in our lives bears a great weight on our mental, emotional, and physical state. And for those of us who had lost someone to COVID-19, the sudden and inexplicable tragedy takes a toll on us, our families, and our communities as a whole. Tonight, our featured speakers, who will share their stories of navigating the loss of a loved one to COVID-19, coping strategies, professional resources, and community supports and healing from the mass trauma of the pandemic. We're so grateful to be joined by our speakers. And although you can see their impressive bios on our website, I'll briefly tell you a little bit about them. Two of our speakers will be sharing their personal stories. The first, Andrea Ruth, has a long and storied career in organizational excellence and in educating communities and organizations about trauma. She currently co-chairs the Sarasota Strong's Aging, Trauma, and Resilience Committee. Tonight, she will be sharing her own personal journey through loss during the pandemic. Pastor Jenny McIntyre and her family founded and run the Altar Congregation, offering support to groups and personal care for her congregation and the community at large. She unexpectedly lost her husband, John, to COVID on September 2nd, 2021, and hopes that what she can share with us tonight will help us all find comfort and hope for the future. And then joining us in a professional capacity is Lenny Darville, a bilingual grief specialist at Tidewell Hospice. And Lenny will be helping us guiding us through that deeper conversation around death and dying. So with that little background, I'd like us to get started tonight with our first speaker then, Andrea Ruth. Andrea, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, everyone. And Annalise, I want to try to share a couple of pictures. So if you can let me share my screen. And I should also mention that Joelle Johns was going to speak tonight. She was on our panel, but she's not feeling well and had to send her regrets. So we'll keep her in our thoughts and prayers. Oh, yes. And before we forget, Pastor Jenny was going to start us out with a little song and prayer in song. So maybe we should hold off on mine until she does that.
Thanks for reminding me of that. Thank you.
Betsy just did not want to hear from me. No, Well, listen, I'm not going to do a benediction in Latin. I'll do it in English. But this is a beautiful song, and it's called The Blessing, and it's pulled right out of scripture. So I hope it blesses you guys tonight. Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 Make his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. Make his presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you, all around you, and within you. He is with you, he is with you. In the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 yeah. Amen. 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 Make his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. Make his presence be before you, and beside you, and beside you, all around you, and be with you. He is with you, he is with you all in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, he is for you, oh, he is for you, 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 yeah. Amen. 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 Amen.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Pastor Denny. So I want to talk with you all tonight about my stepfather, Art. And Art Zago was my stepfather, but he and my mother were married for 39 years. So for me, he was really like my second father, right? And I'm going to share a few photos of this gentleman as we go along because he is a character. Let's see if I can do this. So this is a picture of Art. Can you see that? See his fedora and his sort of glint in his eye. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York. First generation in this country. His mother moved here from Italy. And Art and my mother actually met dancing. Let's see if I can find a dancing picture here. They met dancing at a wedding reception. Sorry, I didn't get to put these in order. This is a picture of them dancing just down the road here at Cortez. They got to visit me a couple of years in a row, and they always wanted to go out dancing while they were here. And people always watched them dance because there was something magical about this couple dancing together. So they were married 39 years, and he gave her a very large family, lots of grandchildren, lots of great-grandchildren. And he also gave her a lot of reasons to smile. He had a great sense of humor. He was laughing a lot. You can see some of our family with my mom and Art. He
Andrea,
was a character.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're not seeing large photos. We're just seeing them small icons in a folder.
Oh, weird. Well, I'll tell you what, I will just stop sharing that and just talk through.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I should have sent them to you for you to do it. Sorry about that. But at any rate, Art gave my mom a very large family, which was important because my mom was a single, only child, and she was adopted, and family was very important to her. She wanted to have a big family. So Art had 6 children. They all have children, and now they all have children, and there's a lot of children. I can't even keep track of all of them. And what she gave him was companionship and love and joy. They laughed together a lot, and he liked to tell what I would call most stupid jokes, and she always laughed, and a lot of times they were repeats, and it didn't matter because he was being funny. So in the later years, in the last few years, my mom really kept Art active. He was 93 years old when he died. He had always been active. I can remember being on a boat out on the lake when he was in his late 60s, early 70s, and he was slalom skiing on the lake, almost parallel to the water. Whoa, how did you do that? Did I do that?
I did that. I have it from last November when you had pictures of him.
How funny. So this is another thing you like to do is fish. He was very active. So this was only fishing photos, only 2 years old. He was not ready to die, although he was starting to talk about, I don't want to be a burden to you, Alice. you know, I'm not getting around as much. And she would say, oh, Art, come on, let's go walk around the block. And they would do it. He rarely told her no when she tried to get him up and moving. So when COVID hit, they became very careful and cautious, of course, like a lot of older people did about their activities. And they live in an apartment building with a lot of other older adults, independent living in Kansas City. And they wore their masks, washed their hands, rarely went out in public. They were just extremely careful. But something happened. We're still not sure how he got it, but Art contracted COVID. And then my mom tested positive, and my stepsister, who was with them, they weren't sure she was positive at the time, but she had been around them a lot, so she stayed with them. And Art ended up in the hospital at one point, and then he bounced back. And we thought he was going to be fine and be all right. And about 3 or 4 days later, he woke up, could not move, and ended up back in the hospital. And at that point, his oxygen counts were so low, and he had a do not resuscitate order. He didn't want to be on a ventilator. He had never wanted that. And so they just kept upping. Some of you might know this from the medical field. They kept increasing his oxygen flow and concentration, trying to get enough oxygen for him to breathe. And pretty soon it was apparent that was not going to sustain him. So we were fortunate enough to have some really awesome nurses around him, and they arranged for our very large family to do 2 different Zooms to say goodbye. He was already pretty much, you know, out of it, but my family got to be with him through Zoom and say goodbye to him. And then one very special day, one of the nurses got my mom into all the PPE they could find. I think she had a double suit thing on and masks like crazy and goggles and a shield and everything else, but they let her go in and be with him for about an hour. And that was important to her, and it was also extremely hard, you know, for her to do that. So she sat with him, and a few hours later he passed away. The pain of this for me and a lot of my family came not just with Art's death, but how some people reacted to it. So a couple days after he died, by the way, he died a year ago yesterday. And a couple days after he died, the family all knew. So a couple of us posted something on Facebook to let the wider community know. And I just said, my mom lost her dancing partner, and I posted some of their dancing pictures, and I said that she lost her dancing partner to COVID. And a few minutes later, one of my mom's cousins posted, well, we heard it wasn't COVID. We heard it was pneumonia, not at all COVID. He didn't die of COVID. And I thought, first of all, how can someone do that to a family who's grieving? But secondly, it occurred for me like a slam that maybe Andrea, because she's in Florida, doesn't know what's going on with her own stepfather and her mother, you know. And I don't know that it was intended that way, but it felt that way. And I just fell apart at that point, because it seemed like there were people in my family, for political reasons and all of their denying reasons, could not accept that this man died of COVID and COVID-related causes, that that was not consistent with their beliefs. And it really hurt my mother because, you know, she sat there with them and watched him gasp for breath and lost the love of her life. So that denial really was painful for us. And the other thing that was very painful is that around that time, my mother and my family started losing other people in their circles. In fact, my mom got to the point where she started keeping a list because she couldn't, you know, she was grieving herself and she couldn't remember every call that she was getting about other people dying. One of my father's cousins, an older gentleman in Southwest Missouri, called to express his sympathies to my mom. And a week later, he had died of COVID. It just seemed like it was piling on, more and more deaths and loss. And I'll tell you that if my mother hadn't had all the family around her, and she, thankfully, Art gave her this big, huge family, and if we didn't have some faith, I don't know what would have happened. I had a conversation with Joelle, who was going to present tonight, not long ago, because I'm still having people in my life die. A friend of mine last week died, not of COVID, but died suddenly. And it just seems like every time I think I'm getting to equilibrium in my life and I can get my work done and do the things, and maybe we're going back to some semblance of so-called normal, there's another loss. And I called Joelle and I said, I need to talk to somebody. Can you please help me process this? And one of the things she said to me was, Andrea, first you have to give yourself grace, and even more grace right now, because we're all experiencing some loss, grief, piled upon things we're seeing in the news, things we're hearing about in our country. And she said, you know, life isn't all sad or all joy. We live in the space in between. And that provided so much for me, because I've been feeling like, well, it shouldn't be so sad. And when is it going to get back to joy? You know? And the truth is, I think for me, that my life is going to be dancing in between those for the rest of my life. There will be grief, there will be sadness, and there will be extreme joy and happiness. And there'll be a lot of days when both of those things happen in the same day. So I leave you with that. I think I just am so grateful for Sarasota Strong and the people I've met through this group. I consider you my Florida support. I have my Kansas City support and my Missouri support, and I have all of you as my Florida support. And I hope that we all, you know, can be there for each other. And thanks for all the messages in the chat. I should tell you that my mother spent yesterday with a lot of Art's family eating chicken wings and watching the Chiefs play football. So all is well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that story. It is heartbreaking, and the layers of grief you describe are palpable. And yet your smile is so radiant as you tell us, and your wisdom coming through that you know you're going to walk in that middle line with grief and joy on either side. Thank you so much. Lenny, do you want to take us through this a little bit more too, from the resource and conversation. Is this normal, what Andrea's feeling? Like, tell us more.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea, for being so raw and vulnerable. That is not an easy thing to do, you know. Yes, it is absolutely normal. I think she described what it is like to grieve during this time pretty accurately, right? Grief is a roller coaster. It really is. There's moments of, like you said, you can be happy and grief might be at a low, and then all of a sudden it gets back to a peak. And we're living life somewhere in between that chaos. That's such a beautiful way of explaining that. Yes. So really, I think the support, the fact that you were able to have support, the fact that you have so much family around you, that is so key when we're grieving. I think that that cannot be overstressed. I always tell people, I work with many people that are grieving, and that's one of the main things, is seek out your support system. Even if it's through Zoom, even if it's through a phone call. Yeah, we haven't been able to have what we normally had, right? This has really impacted how we grieve so much. So yeah. Should I go ahead and start okay. I'm going to walk everyone through just a little bit of psychoeducation and some normalizing of what this experience that Andrea just so beautifully described, which is probably either has hit all of us in one way or another, either directly or our families or friends or all the above, right? So bear with me as I get this going. All right, so I'm trying to get the program started. Annalise, is it not letting me?
If you just hit slideshow, it might be hiding under your little bar at the top there.
Oh, okay, that's what's going on. All right, let me get it started and then I'll share. Nope, let me do that. Does anyone have any suggestions on how to get to this thing?
Did you try the little?
Andrea, go to the tool and to the toolbar and go to slideshow. Right on top, right after the brown. Keep going to the right. Keep going to the right. A little lower.
It won't let me. That's the problem.
Yeah,
Oh, it won't
Penny,
let you.
Yes.
if you look, it's not. Oh, well,
what's-
there is a slideshow.
Start button.
Yeah, it's just the Zoom bar. I know the Zoom bar probably sits over it, so there should be a way to hide it.
There's an icon. You can't see the icon near the notes icon on the bottom, or can you drag the bar to make the one slide wider and we can see it without being in?
Ah, thank you guys. Got it. Okay, sorry about that. I swear I've done these before. That had never happened.
It's okay.
All right.
It takes a village.
It does. Thank you. All right. So, experiencing grief through a time of COVID. How has this impacted us, right? In many ways. Does anybody know why this isn't wanting to? There we go. Okay. Grief. So one of the biggest surprises for myself personally, as I went through this process, and for my clients, is what a long process this can be. And in this being said, it's important to normalize that. We come from a culture of lots of toxic positivity where we just want to get up and keep moving and everything's good, everything's fine. But there is something to this human experience of grief and loss that is such a part of us that we need to allow ourselves to go on this roller coaster ride in order to get through in a very healthy way. Not saying it's easy, it's very painful, but here, this is what grief is. It really is a roller coaster. It is one of the most misunderstood and neglected processes that we experience because our culture doesn't really allow for this. You know, we are taught how to gain. We're taught to get married and have kids, or what's the new job you're going to get, or the house or the car, right? Very rarely do we have conversations surrounding grief. Very rarely do we see that really truly portrayed until very recently, because we've had a global reason to look at grief. So knowledge of the grieving process, that is the goal of what I do here at Tidewell, is to kind of offer that knowledge to kind of ease some of that pain, so we don't feel on top of everything else like there's something wrong with me. Here's a short list of some manifestations of grief that we can feel physically. For all of us that have grieved, we know that feeling in our chest, we know that shortness of breath, we know that our head can hurt, our body hurts in this experience. Some common thoughts and behaviors, lots of disbelief. That can be a little disconcerting in the beginning when we're 6 months in. We still have that moment where we walk into our loved one's room and we almost want to talk to them or call them or text them. Very natural. A big one here, you guys can kind of read through this list, but a big one that I want to call out is just what we call grief fog being a natural part of this experience. I have so many clients that on top of their deep grief are thinking there's something cognitively wrong with them because they're forgetting their keys. They're driving and then arriving at the wrong place. They're missing appointments. If you're going through this, please know that that's just part of this process. The reason being, there's our conscious thoughts that we know that we're having, and then all these other subconscious thoughts. And what does grief do? It opens up so many questions, right? So many existential questions. And all of those are kind of processing in the background for us. So be kind to yourself, please. Be very, very kind to yourself. I think Andrea said, give yourself grace. That's a perfect way to look at it. So all very common in grief. Specifically with COVID-19, these are some of the things that myself and my colleagues have noticed in the last 2 years of offering support and mental health services to bereaved clients and families and ourselves. There is bereavement overload. So Andrea called that out. It just felt like it got one loss after another, multiple losses in a family, right? The fact that the loss is unexpected. Yes, losing our loved one to COVID-19 is unexpected. That is not something we would have planned on. Lack of rituals being so important to us as a community. That's just the way that we express our love for our loved one. And many of us weren't able to do that when this all first started. Social isolation at a time that we were supposed to receive extra support. And added layers of guilt, whether we survived and our loved one didn't survive. That guilt has really been a very apparent factor in this, and anger. So looking at bereavement overload, we talked about compounded grief. So I had a client that really stuck out for me. She called for help after her husband had passed, and 3 days later, her father passed from COVID-19. So her whole family had contracted the COVID-19 virus, but those were the only 2 members of the family that ended up in the hospital. And for her, it extended past even just her husband and her father. Her father was an extended caregiver to her children, as her husband and her both worked. And her husband was the true breadwinner of the family. So now she has financial losses. She has loss of caring for her kids, and she's dealing with all of this, right? So this is what can happen during this time. And then many other losses that, collectively, many people have experienced, of jobs, lifestyles. I hear that all the time. Well, Lenny, am I ever going to be able to just go to the store and not worry? Friendships. I think we talked about a lot of the political aspects that came along with this. COVID-19 impacted a lot of friendships, or losses of friendships too, because of death. So just a lot of additional ways that we were just overloaded with grief. If we look at the pandemic itself as a primary loss, so this is global, right? Here's a pandemic. And what does it mean to us? All the losses that it has caused. For many of us, we lost the ability of our entertainment or social life. If we got sick, the loss of our health, loss of, death. I think loss of events, those were important. The graduations, the proms, the weddings that we didn't get to have, the funerals, the celebrations of life, all of those very important moments. So globally, and then we add that on if we had an actual death in our family as well. So it can, a multitude of secondary losses here caused by COVID. Unexpected loss is actually a factor that we look at when we're working with someone who is grieving. Is, how shocked are they? What, did they see this coming? So this definitely added that to their grief. Lots of trauma here if you weren't able to say goodbye. There was a lot of protocols in the beginning, especially with the hospitals not allowing family members to come. Some didn't even get to come in with PPE. So very, very difficult. And for others where they had already planned on being able to care for their loved one through end of life, and they were on hospice. If their loved one contracted COVID-19, then they were not able to do that because their loved one needed to go at a special hospice house to be cared for. So having that taken away from you when it meant so much to be there with your loved one. And of course, the what ifs, right? What could we have changed? Which we have with any loss, but with COVID, it's just a little trickier. Just that feeling that it could have been avoided. The lack of rituals that we discussed, so important for us to be able to have those memorials and funerals. For some, this has been completely suspended. For some, they, did not go back to it, almost a year and a half to 2 years later. And then also just being extremely isolated after that, not being able to do the ritual and receive that support can add in another layer there. So if this is the first time, if your spouse was who you were quarantining with, suddenly you were alone and grieving. And that goes into the social isolation. Another big risk factor in grief that we look for is, having social support. Loss of coping mechanisms, so not being able to do the things that normally would have given you a small break from grief. And for those that were working when they, lost their loved one, they might have now been working at home, so they didn't even have any social support at work either. And also they lost a sense of structure by working at home. I think a lot of us that did end up working at home for a bit sense that. Well, it's all compounded, with having had a loss. Guilt, a big emotion that we keep hearing as well. I think we were all at some point pretty worried about infecting others and how hard this is to trace. So caregivers and family members being concerned about possibly being the cause or infecting their loved one, which caused further isolation. And then survivor guilt, lots of existential questions here, like why am I here and not my loved one? And then the stigmas, and Andrea pointed this out. So again, the politicizing of this virus, bringing on a whole layer of pain. Many people would stay silent about the reason that their loved one died. In fear that their social group, if they were not believing in COVID-19, would stigmatize them. So this caused a lot of disenfranchised grief. So what did I do wrong for this to happen? Shame. I had a client who her whole family was not in Florida, only her husband, and he passed. And she was also sick when he passed. So she's trying to recuperate at home, and no one even came to see her. All her friends that she thought she had, nobody came to knock on the door for fear of COVID. And then the causing of othering, so just shifting from normally us wanting to associate with those that are in pain, but instead seeing people shifting to, they're trying to stay within their own groups of beliefs. And of course, all that leads to a lot of anger. So knowing that that's part of this journey, but having it be magnified because of the misinformation that you're hearing on the news. You have a loved one that died and all you're hearing is that this is a hoax. That can make you pretty angry. I know it did for me. Having family or friends be dismissive. For example, well, were they vaccinated? Almost a blame on the victim, you know. Very similar to when people ask somebody who died of lung cancer, ask their family, well, did they used to smoke? No. Does that make it any less meaningful? No. So in that sense that someone or something is to blame, why wasn't the shot available yet? Why weren't they or I more careful? Lots going on there for us. So what helps? I work a lot with families on finding moments of peace, is what I call it. So finding mindfulness techniques that help you take a break from your grief. We work a lot on trying to stay out of the past and out of the future, because anxiety comes from the future and depression comes from the past, and just helping them work on staying in the moment, whether that's bike riding, swimming, breathing exercises, anything that keeps you in the moment is going to be very helpful during really intense grief. This is a time to experiment with new things. So now that things are opening up more, this is more applicable. Prior, when we were all so isolated, it was, well, let's crochet, let's do pottery, right? Let's just find different things, even if you've never liked them before, because we are not who we were prior to losing our loved one. So those things that maybe brought us satisfaction before probably won't right now, and that's okay. We're in a flux. We're in that in between. Allowing yourself to explore those existential questions with a spiritual guide. This is so important. We ignore our spirituality so much. And with grief and death, how could we not explore that piece for ourselves? Whatever that may mean for you, you know, so being open to, if you haven't reached out before, doing that, you know, and helping your loved one, if someone you love is grieving, helping them kind of feel that strength to explore that. And then the biggest part of this is finding how to maintain the love in the relationship. I work a lot with clients on realizing that just because your loved one died does not mean the love you had for them died, or the relationship that you had with them died, because it doesn't. You continue to love your loved one, and you continue to have all those emotions and feelings. Also, telling the story as many times as you need to. If you need to write it down, then do that. If there's those last moments are staying with you, being able to just share that. If you're being the support system to someone who's grieving, it's listening without comment, but offering support, right? They need to be able to express their emotions without feeling judged. So definitely putting any politics aside during this time. Reawakening to relationships that remain. This was especially difficult if you were isolated, but if it was phone calls, if it's Zoom, if it's FaceTime, text, whatever it may be, this is where support comes in. And finding ways to honor your loved one. So this goes back to finding a connection. So if there was, for example, I have a client who she loved to cook with her husband and had a really hard time being able to get back in the kitchen after he died. So we tried a few different things, and we landed on putting a picture of him in the kitchen while she's cooking and serving him a little bit of wine with her. And that made her feel connected. And you know what? That's perfectly healthy if that's what she needed to do to get back to some semblance of normalcy and routine and connection to her hubby. These are what we look at as tests of mourning. So there's no stages of grief anymore. We look at you being able to get through each of these steps in order to being able to get to what we call a healthy experience of grief. In between, it's a roller coaster, but that's okay. So it's accepting the reality of the loss, which takes a long time. Experiencing the pain, so trying to not ignore it. Allowing yourself to talk about your story as many times as you need to, reaching out to those that are support systems to you, your church or your family or all of the above, right? And And then adjusting to a world without your loved one, that's a big one. What does that look like? That takes a long time to get there. And investing in the future, in your future. So I wanted to make a whole slide on self-care. This is the time where self-care actually is the most important. It's always important. As a mental health professional, I'm always touting self-care, but this time, this needs to be your number one thing because you are already so low on resiliency when you're in so much pain that being able to take the time to truly give yourself that space to get to where you need to be is going to require really caring for yourself. And if that means volunteering or doing some work that offers help to others, wonderful as well, but also focusing on yourself. Any questions or thoughts? I think we're doing that at the end though, right guys? So the Tidewell Grief and Education Support Services are free to the community as well as our patients and families. And we'll share more of that information at the end as well. And we do offer support groups as well. All right, thank you guys.
Lenny, thank you. That was very instructive and good to think about in the context of all we've been through in the past couple of years. And now, Jenny, are you ready to share your story with us of the very recent passing of your late husband from COVID in September?
Yes, I am ready. Annalise, you have that picture ready? So the first thing I want to say is that I joined this meeting not from a position of superiority, but from very much going through it right now. This was us less than 4 months ago. And now it's just my daughter who I had to drop at college 2 weeks into her dad's hospitalization when we still didn't know what was going to happen. And the handsome little boy on my left was my son, JC, who is only 13. But if you would have told us 4 months ago when we were having a small celebration in our backyard, celebrating my daughter's graduation from high school, we would have probably had a very hard time picturing that this is where we would be today. On Saturday, I had to take my son to UTC Mall to fix his tablet. And when I heard the Christmas music and I saw the Christmas lights, I started hyperventilating. And I literally had to reach to some prayer friends and say, please pray for me. Because the problem is I had my son next to me. So I knew I couldn't let go. And I still spend a lot of time on the floor crying and screaming. God and I have a lot of fights. I preface my story saying these things because if you are here and you came looking for understanding and compassion, I want you to know you have mine. And as I share my story, I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that I'm going through it and that I was telling Annalise earlier today that when Colleen asked me if I would be willing to do this, my mind was saying no, and my mouth was saying yes. And my mind was saying, what are you doing? You need help yourself. But my mouth was saying, yes, I want to do this. I want to do this. And so here I go. My husband and I loved each other for almost 23 years. He died 1 month short of our 23rd anniversary. We met online, and we were one of the pioneers of online romance. And I was a practicing attorney in my country of national origin, but fell crazily in love with this minister guy, and the rest is history. John and I dedicated our lives to work in the communities of Sarasota and Bradenton and internationally to Latin America and Panama, my country of national origin. And we work with the poor people, and we spent a lot of time bringing hope, feeding the homeless, and showing people God's love. I had the type of life that I felt guaranteed me long tenure in this world because it was a life devoted to service. Unfortunately, when COVID came, you know, Lenny was talking about misinformation. He listened to some of that. And 3 of us vaccinated and he didn't. And he apologized once he was hospitalized, which was one day after his 60th birthday. And we of course told him, it's okay, Daddy, we forgive you. And he said, I'll make it up to you when I come out of the hospital. But a week later, he was on a respirator. And a few days later, he had to be induced into a coma, and no amount of oxygen or prayer or trust brought the miracle that I wanted, which was receiving my husband back. During the 32 days of hospitalization, I had to work really, really hard at keeping my children going and our congregations going. So I didn't do a lot of self-care, Lenny. I didn't give myself room to mourn or to be sad because I felt the weight of the world over my shoulders. And I stayed strong through his memorial service, which was broadcasted because I wanted to make sure everybody knew that I still love God, although he had allowed my husband to pass away. Now, after that memorial service, which was on September 18th, then Jenny realized that she had had a great loss. And she's still trying to navigate the waters of loss. There are 3 things that I am holding on to. I want to share with you today. Number 1 is that I am heartbroken and I am not making any excuses about it. I will feel my emotions. I will lay down on the floor and cry and scream for as long as I have to, and I will have fights with God, although at the end I always say, I'm really sorry. I know I was really harsh. I still love you. I love you. I love you forever, right? But I will feel my emotions. I just won't follow their guidance. I will feel my emotions. I will lay down on the floor and cry. I just won't stay there. I will feel the desire not to continue going on tomorrow. But tomorrow I will get up, get my son ready, and take him to school. And I have to give myself a lot of grace because sometimes my emotions allow me to do only one thing per day. I still look at his death certificate or our marriage license and completely lose it. And the 10 errands that I was supposed to run that day end up being only one. And I have learned to say, Jenny, it is okay. I will feel my emotions. And so I encourage you to feel them, to face them head on. I have told my friends in no uncertain terms, and I have many, expect to see me sad for a long time. And if I make you uncomfortable, just don't be too close to me because I will make no apologies for it. Your friends, your true friends, the people that are going to build you up and that are going to help you go through this process are those that will give you the room that you need to feel your emotions. Well, that's the first thing I hold on to. The second thing I hold on to is gratitude. I lost this amazing man, and my loss is great, and my tears are many, and I still feel like when my phone beeps, he's texting me, or when my phone rings, he's calling me, and when I'm doing the dishes, I still feel that he's going to come behind me and hug me and say, oh, thank you for doing the dishes, mommy. And sometimes at 4 a.m, I feel like the keys are trying to open the door, and I think it's him coming from one of his shifts at the hospital because he was doing chaplaincy for the hospital. And I realize that the depth of my pain is directly correlatable to the depth of my love for my husband. And the truth is, I am grateful. And I would never give up the amazing 23 years that I had with him and the life that we built, not to feel this pain. And so I have learned to equate my pain with gratitude. I have a lot of pictures and I look at them as I cry and I say, you know what? We had a fantastic run. And nothing would make me want to skip having met John and becoming his wife. Not even the pain that I'm feeling right now. So I'm grateful. And I encourage you to focus on those wonderful things and experiences that you enjoyed with your loved one. And I look at my children. Right now, my daughter is dancing completely muted because she knows mommy is doing a conference. And I look at her and look at her little body dancing away. And I said, yes, I have much to be grateful for. I look at my 13-year-old who has grown overnight and is now giving me hugs, although before he said he did not like physical contact. And I'm very grateful for that. So find things to be grateful for. I am sure that if you really, really look for them, you'll find them. And that takes me to the third thing I hold on to. I am hopeful. Even if I push aside my spirituality, even if I look at it just from a very rational,
we're doing good. Coping with losing someone to COVID-19.
Looks like we need someone to be muted. I'm not sure who that is.
Q strong. Yeah, look at that. Look at the whole thing.
But I will continue.
Ex McDonald.
Can you guys hear me okay? Because I hear other voices. Okay. So even if I put my spirituality next to me, it makes no rational sense not to be hopeful, right? We all have been wounded before, and eventually the wound is going to get better. As horrible as it feels and as unreasonable as it feels to me right now emotionally that I am going to feel better, the truth is, rationally, no wound stays open if treated. So I'm making sure that I treat it by doing exactly what Lenny was recommending. I take care of me and I take care of those around me. That guarantees me that I am treating my wound and that this emotional wound will be no exception. It will eventually close. And now I must bring my God, because I would be a bad pastor if I didn't. As Lenny says, whatever shape your spirituality takes, I deeply respect it. I'll speak from my perspective. I was very blessed, and although I had to dress like a little Martian, I was able to go into my husband's room on that last day. Doctors wanted me to say goodbye over the phone, and I managed to convince them that I wanted to be there. And I was able to thank him for 23 years, and I was able to encourage him to run into the arms of his Heavenly Father. Because of that, I know that this is only a momentary, temporary separation. I know that he lives on. I look at a picture and I say that when I see him, I will spank him, because he went to heaven, got his crown of justice, and left me here stuck. The hope that I will see him, the hope that my children and I will get to hold him again, and the hope that he now has a body that is incapable of being sick or feeling any type of pain. That hope is my God-given right, and it is your God-given right. We are people of hope. We have every reason to be heartbroken as a result of our loss, but we also have every reason and every right to embrace hope, because we're still here. And there's a lot of people, and we are a perfect sample of that are crying and that are suffering too. I met today over lunch with a lady that lost her son to suicide. When I start feeling too sorry for myself, I find someone to love. And that is what I did today. And so if you are looking for spiritual support, I want you to remember it makes me feel much better when I'm loving on someone. And I would love to love on you. So those are the three things I'm holding on to. I'm holding on to my heartache because it's natural and I have a right to it. I'm holding on to gratitude because the depth of my loss can only be correlated to the depth of love and a wonderful life that I shared with my husband. And finally, I'm holding on to hope because my wound, as long as I treat it, will be closed. And because there are a lot of people out there, you all included, that need me to stay hopeful, because we all need to hug one another and stay strong for one another. And I think we can do that together. So I want to leave you with that message, a message of hope and of love. You're here, there's hope. And Lenny said something really, really powerful today, and that was, God doesn't need us to trust him for the next 30 years. When this first started, I would say, how am I supposed to go on for the next 30 or 40 years? And I heard the sweet voice of God saying, just trust me for today. And that's what I'm doing. Today, I will trust him for today. Tomorrow, I will trust him for tomorrow, and so forth and so on. So I leave you guys with that word of love and hope. Trust God for today, and today be hopeful. All my love to you guys.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenny. You said heartbroken, gratitude, and hopeful. It's HGH, the human growth hormone, the life that stays with us despite all. Thank you so much for sharing. At this point, we'd like to open up the conversation to anyone with questions or comments. So would everyone unmute your mics and either raise your hand physically or use the raise your hand function if you'd like to talk? Is there anyone?
Or if anyone has maybe their own story that maybe they're thinking about, that once they heard someone talking, they started resonating with some things. We open up the floor to everyone else now.
Olivia?
Everyone started, I guess. I haven't lost anyone to death from COVID, but I just feel so much loss around so many things around COVID. Like our whole lives have changed. You get terrible health care now. The quality of the food you get is inferior. I'm taking a medicine now. I think I could run out of it. My body's like really needing it, and I could run out of it. Whoever thought of that before, you know? My favorite musician couldn't support herself. She moved to Atlanta and had a baby. My favorite thing was to go out dancing to her band, and that's gone. You know, there's just every day there's like another kind of loss that I see because of this experience. And that's not even talking about the polarization in our society. I mean, it's just insanity. The governor of Florida is spending taxpayer money to sue the art organizations here for trying to protect people from COVID. It's like, it's just insane. And it's not really COVID, it's all the forces that fed into COVID and are being fostered by COVID. So I mean, having the loss of a person must make it 1,000-fold to deal with it. Or maybe you just don't deal with the other losses because you're too focusing on the human. I don't know, but it just seems like there's loss everywhere. And Pastor Jeannie, what you were saying, of course, applies to dealing with any loss. But I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, Olivia, I think you made a really good way of expressing just how universal this a sense of loss is, even if you haven't had a loss of a loved one. But to answer your question, it really does just kind of build on top of each other. That's where the compounded part is. So you are definitely grieving. Yeah, we all are in different ways, right? Sorry, Pastor Jean, what were you going to say?
That's okay. Olivia, I was just going to say that it's amazing how the death of a loved one makes everything else become secondary. I used to be very upset that I had to do all my dancing via YouTube and all my exercising in my living room. And then I lost my husband. And the comparison of the loss, you know, it's unbearable. But having said that, you are in mourning, and we need to recognize that too. That is a type of loss. And I just hope that you turn on your computer really, really loud and do some dancing in your living room. Because I'm a dancer too. It works, not as well, but just a tiny bit. That's what my daughter's doing right now, dancing in the living room.
Andy, would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I'd like to actually ask a question building on the observations that Olivia made about how we are all, every one of us, grieving deeply right now. There's a collective grief that's across our society. And we've talked a lot about, and really helpful information from all of you about how to handle your own individual grief. Some really concrete, helpful suggestions. What I'm wondering is it possible to apply the lessons that you've learned about individual grieving at a collective level? What could we as a society do to create rituals or create self-care or create memorialization to somehow handle the collective trauma that's affecting us, not just in this country, but across the whole world right now?
Definitely, I think it all applies. I mean, yes, like doing like this, creating, communities that can reach to each other, that creates support. Even just acknowledging it, right? Like for Olivia, for her to know, yes, you are grieving, you are 100% grieving. We do normally think of a death when we think of grief and loss, but it's not the case. So yeah, Andy, I love that idea of just recreating it. And yes, you would apply the same concepts. And we all need more self-care during this time. We all need to explore our existential questions that are coming up, right? Because how could they not be? We've all experienced a major shift in our lifestyle, even if we haven't, had another loss, and we're seeing the losses of others all around us, and that has to impact us as human beings.
And from a social perspective, another thing that I refuse to do, Andy, and I started way before the passing of my husband, is I have for the last year and a half refused to engage anybody in arguments. It's a waste of energy. And we are all mourning. And when we start arguing, and we've gotten really good at it in the last few years, we are wasting valuable energy. And we are already dealing with enough. And so I pick my battles. And when I see negative comments, or I find that someone is coming at me with attacks, kind of like what Lenny was saying earlier, either, did he vaccinate, or he probably didn't die of COVID, it must have been pneumonia. My answer to both is yes, whatever you say. Because right now, engaging individuals in argument and polemics and politicization, Dale Carnegie says, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And I really, really believe that one of the things that's making this whole mourning process worse is the argumentative nature of our relationships. So if I can have a nice conversation with someone that person's gonna confide in me, I'm gonna confide in them, and we're gonna have mutual respect, that is the relationship that I engage in. Anything else, I have slowly but surely chipped at it and cut away, because it's an energy that I cannot afford to waste right now.
So can we continue this this just another minute, because what you're saying, Jenny, is so on target to what I was feeling with this question. So if we've suffered as a society, as a collective, then we need to be grieving, mourning as a collective. And if you look at other collective traumas like wars or major disasters, there's often some kind of coming together as a society to acknowledge what happened and how hard it was. So you have a Holocaust memorial or a Holocaust Remembrance Day, or you have a place, a memorial that is built where everybody goes and puts teddy bears and whatever publicly. There's a coming together to acknowledge the collective impact of whatever it is happened. And that seems like a really important thing for a society to acknowledge and remember and memorialize the trauma that they've been through collectively. But in this case, if you have people who are disagreeing that it happened, how can we, and there's a natural tendency to want to forget a horrible thing anyway, right? I mean, that's the human thing is, well, the sooner we forget that, the better. Well, let's just put it behind us, right? So what I'm struggling with is, given the polarization, given the different realities we're living in, is it possible for us to mourn the grief collectively? And you talked about the need to not argue about it. So how do we come together as a society to mourn together when it's hard to even acknowledge that we're talking about the same thing?
My recommendation would be to doing one small group at a time. Andy, I've had people in my life that I have had to distance myself from. I can mourn with them because they cannot respect where I come from, and they're more interested in arguing and antagonizing than in helping me process this. And I know it's painful, but the reality is we don't need large numbers of people to mourn. And in my case, and of course, every one of us is different, I rely a lot on Zoom. I have a lot of family and friends throughout Latin America, and I connect with them via Zoom. I connect with them via FaceTime. I even have a couple of prayer groups, private prayer groups on Facebook. But again, I have had to unfortunately segregate some people that are not in a mode of respect and camaraderie, that are into fighting. And sometimes fighting and anger is part of the process of mourning too, but it can be it can really negatively affect other people that are also in the process of recovery. So as painful as it may be, I think sometimes there are times in our lives where we have to start narrowing our circle of friends and acquaintances if we want to heal, particularly if we have people around us that are not interested or that cannot accept that we can have different opinions and still support one another. We used to be able to do that in our country, apparently not anymore. There's just a lot of this animosity that if you and I don't feel exactly the same way, we can love one another. It's not true. But if you have people in your life that feel that way, then that would be my humble recommendation, because they need to want to change that in order to change. There's no amount of convincing that's going to do that if they're not willing to change themselves.
Andrea, I think you had your hand up.
Thanks. Just to sort of continue that thread. One of the things I didn't say when I was speaking earlier is one of the things that makes this loss of so many people in my life lately hard, and especially the people who died from COVID, is that prior to COVID becoming a thing, I naively had it in my brain that, this polarization and this angst and this personal attack kind of culture that we've been dealing with for a few years, if we had some, big, huge catastrophe like a COVID, people would come together. And now I'm mourning that. That did not happen. It just is so, I think it's another layer of the stuff. And I am interested in what you're suggesting, Andy, that, yes, we need to come together in small groups, and Pastor Jenny, we have to sometimes have like my brother not involved in that group because he just wants to argue. But I think also as a society, as a country, maybe even as the world, there does seem to be this need to acknowledge what has happened, to mourn together, to have some kind of ritual or something, because, this is a lot of people died. I mean, I just heard today on the news that we have now had more people die in the US from COVID than we did in 2020. And hardly anybody's even talking about that. And those are people. That's your husband. So I don't know what it is, but I think there's something that's going to arise. Something needs to arise for the culture to acknowledge this and have some sort of ritual or some sort of acknowledgement or tribute, or I don't know.
Well,
that would be really helpful for me. I'll speak for myself.
yeah, but in the meantime, we need to get very creative and take personal responsibility for finding that support system. If you take a look at the biggest plagues and huge events in the world, memorials were not built until many years later, where people could look back and they were no longer fighting the specific situation. When I think of the Smithsonian Circle and the Holocaust Museum, that museum was not put together until years and years and years after it was already over. Sometimes it's very hard for humanity to build a memorial or to really create a formalized way of grieving while they are in the midst of the crisis. And unfortunately, COVID is a crisis that's still very much ongoing. Now, our needs to be supported and to mourn are here, they're real, and they're now. And so I encourage, I congratulate Sarasota Strong, and Elise and I were talking at the beginning of the conversation on things that we want to partner together to help. And my encouragement to each one of you is each one of us can make a difference. Start your own group, invite a friend to a Zoom meeting or create something, because I think eventually the world is going to look back and we're going to be able to collectively mourn at everything we've lost in the last 2.5 years. But I don't think we're there yet. There are still a lot of things that divide us, and we're still very much in the middle of it. I don't think the crisis has matured enough for us to be able to have a solution at that macro level that we're discussing. So I think in the meantime, we need to get creative and seek our own support by surrounding ourselves with friends. That would be my humble recommendation.
That was a great answer to that. And I think I've talked about this in past and in other forums on other topics, but sometimes we always think, how can we make an impact on a larger level, not realizing that starting in your own smaller circles is really what leads to that larger impact. And I think it speaks, to this topic as well. And, like Jenny has said, starting your own little groups. And if some people aren't involved in that group, that's just how it's going to be. And we're going to move forward. And, I still even think about it with the 9/11 memorial, there's still people that think that's a whole huge conspiracy as well. And, you know, we had to move past a lot of differences there even. So it's definitely, like Jenny said, we're still in the midst of it. It's probably going to be years down the line until we're going to be able to have that large scale collective healing and remembrance and memorial, but starting small is the way to go. We are ready now. Just because everyone else isn't ready now doesn't mean we have to wait on them. Absolutely.
Annalise has my contact information. If anybody wants to start or continue the morning club, you're welcome.
I think this is a great point, actually. Since we just have a few minutes left, I can bring up, I have a few resources that I'll share on the screen with you guys, but also I will send this out in an email with like clickable links that you guys can actually go to and visit, and numbers that you can call. So the first, of course, is Pastor Jenny and her congregation. They have on Sundays at 10 a.m. and Wednesdays at 7 a.m. here. I think there's another one here. They have bilingual services. So we are very excited about that as well. A lot of people that are involved in SRQ Strong know that we have really been working on outreach in Spanish-speaking communities, and it was just God, fate, the universe, whatever you want to call it, that, you know, introduced Jenny to us, and finding this out was just such a blessing. So we're so happy and grateful to have had you here with us tonight and to continue partnering with you in the future, and so happy that you have this congregation. And then, of course, Tidewell, that also offer bilingual services. There is a number there and support groups. Like I said, I'll be sending out links and more details about the actual groups in an email after this, along with the recording. They have their specific Blue Butterfly Family Grief Center. That is a hospice program that supports grieving children and teens ages 5 to 18. Blue Butterfly at tidewell.org. And then Centerstone Careline, Suncoast Behavioral Health Center, they have a helpline as well. And then I would be remiss if I did not include our own Helen Neal Ali in her healing workshops that she offers monthly, and she's got so much more going on. And I would normally share a flyer for what we have going on next month, but it is going to be a busy holiday month, so we're going to take December off. We are going to reconvene in January, and we're going to start with a new format. We are going to slowly start working back to in-person format. So we're going to do 1 month online and then the second month in person. So January will be online, and then February we're really excited to do something in person with you all, and really hope that you guys can join us. I'll be sending out promotional materials about that topic that's coming up in January, and then the related activity in person in February. So thank you so much, Pastor Jenny, Lenny, Andrea, everyone, for tuning in on Facebook and on Zoom. Thank you, Betsy, for being an amazing moderator. And I think unless anyone has anything else they want to say, we are at a good wrapping point here. All right.
Thank you all. Don't forget, this has been recorded, so if you'd like to watch it later, you'll be able to do that. You can immediately watch it in our archive of videos. And thank you all, and happy Thanksgiving.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Thank you.